All right. Good morning, Doug. Back with some viewer Q&A. Big question today is, when are commodity stocks going to finally turn around? It seems like they've been in the gutter for a long, long time.
Well, it's kind of funny that you should ask that question, because just today, all these commodities have exploded upwards. I mean, gold is up $40 or $45, and silver is up $1.20, big move. Even copper is up like 8% or something. That's big move for copper. In fact, all the commodities are up today. Oil is up, everything's up. So why did this happen today? Well, I don't actually know. Why did all the commodities move up ensemble today? I don't know. I'm not sure anybody knows. We may have to turn to MSNBC to have a talking head to tell us what really happened today. My guess is it's the worm has turned and they're finally moving. And today just happens to be the day. You have any thoughts or heard anything?
I don't know. I just see I know it's been really flushing some people out. Some people have been very disappointed with gold in particular. One of the guys in our this Monday men's group we have, sends these text messages basically every time gold is like notching a new low. It's like 1646, and then the next week it's down a little more, and he tells me again, and I'm like, well, I'd still buy. I'd buy here. I'd buy here is what I kept saying. So I know people who are believers are becoming very demoralized, and I guess that's the point of the markets, right? It's like to suck you in, to just crush your dreams right before it starts to turn around. Isn't that kind of the way the markets work?
Yeah, that's exactly the way they work. So when you're most discouraged and you most want to throw in the towel, that's like the bell ringing in your head to do the opposite of what you think you should do. So look, they say, well, how do you make money in the markets? Well, you buy low and you sell high. And I'm of the opinion that gold is at the low end of its range right now, and the same for silver, and the same for almost all these things. So now's a good time to buy. Yeah, exactly. Now, the big problem is going to be is if these things go for a really wild and crazy run that goes on for months or even a couple of years at this point, we'll probably sell too soon, trying to second guess ourselves and therefore outsmart ourselves. Well, since I don't treat gold as a speculation, I treat it as a savings vehicle, there's no danger I'm going to do that. I'm just going to continue accumulating more during periods of weakness like this and not do anything when it runs up. Now, these gold stocks are something else again. And you looked at a few numbers just before we went on the air here that were actually pretty encouraging. They jumped quite a bit. I try not to watch these things actually on a day-to-day basis, because it just confuses your psychology. I mean, it does.
Yeah, well, just looking at even Barrick at this point is up almost 7% on the day. So even the big guy makes a huge move today.
That's a big move for a big stock like that. And Newmont is up how much today then?
About the same. Yeah, pretty much the same. It's 7.5% now.
And Equinox, did you say it was up 16% today?
16.6 right now. Yes.
That's a pretty good move. So I guess all this stuff is up today. We'll see what happens next week.
Okay. All right. So next question is, are there any governments acting responsibly today?
I don't know of any that are. I can't think of any government that's acting responsibly today. I mean, look, I pointed this out many times, but it's worth pointing out again and again. At the beginning of the 20th century, governments were just a minor nuisance. They took very, very little of the GNP of countries. They something like 5% almost all their revenue was customs duties, import duties. There was no income tax. Central banks barely existed. The currencies were stable, so they weren't inflating currencies because it was gold being used. There was no wealth tax. There was none of this nonsense, okay? So as these governments have gotten bigger, they've gotten more corrupt, and they've done this at an accelerating rate. So the answer to the question, is there any government that's running counter trend to this? I'm unaware of any that are, quite frankly. I mean, some are worse than others, but
Yeah, I think the problem is it's graded on the curve ultimately. But like one example, and I'm a little biased because I'm here in Uruguay now, and the Uruguayan peso has strengthened to the dollar. There's an incredibly high. Last time I saw the interest rate here was set at 10.25% to try and keep inflation in check. It seems like they were trying to get ahead of it here. The central bank was, and so the peso has actually appreciated 10% compared to the U.S. dollar this year.
is that right? Interest, what are the banks paying?
I don't know what the actual accounts are paying, but I saw the central bank rate was 10.25.
Well, and of course, there's lots of people that are moving from Argentina to Uruguay just because
Europe,
it's a much
Europe too.
friendlier environment, and they're bringing their capital with them. And now that Lula has apparently won in Brazil, there's going to be a lot of Brazilians that are going to cross the border to Uruguay too, probably.
Well, and I was talking to a mutual friend of ours yesterday, Doug, who told me that he's been getting calls from Europeans who want to get established residency and buy property, who have never been here before, but are convinced that they need to move and that this is the place to go. It's kind of the 11th hour in Germany for a lot of them.
Yeah, why does anybody with assets stay in Europe? Certainly stay in Germany at this point. It's a mystery to me. So you can be taxed and regulated and corrupted, and perhaps be close to the front lines of a serious war. So why are Western Europeans staying in Europe? I mean, South America is cheaper and it's quieter and it's more peaceful and it's got everything going for it. And in particular, Uruguay, quite frankly.
Yeah. I don't know, but like the trend seems of people relocating here from everywhere seems to be accelerating, I guess, is the impression I was getting from our friend. Oops, sorry.
No.
Yeah, we've been saying for years about Uruguay. Yeah, and the moves here.
So I guess better late than never for these people. I mean, and they're still the minority, the people that
it's hard to give up. It's hard to give, I think for people where they have places where they've grown up, where they know everybody, where they know things, it's hard for people to leave. But when they're basically on the precipice of energy rationing this winter, that's got to be something that spurs people to move finally.
Yeah, and I don't see things getting any better in Europe. Actually, I see things getting worse with that crazy woman, Ursula Seewolf of the SS, that runs the European Union. Every idea that comes out of Europe is a bad idea today, promoted by dangerous non-entities. I mean, this is really bad. So good. Well, welcome Europeans, but of course anything can change anywhere. And the world is going towards central bank digital currencies and the rest of this type of thing. So
there's no utopia. There's no place.
no, there's no, in fact, there's almost, I'm not trying to take a defeatist attitude, but it's hard to find a place to run and hide. And I do like to bring up that famous story of the person that saw World War II coming. And he said, I'm going to go someplace where the weather's good and got coconuts and fish and, not a lot of people. So where does he go? He goes to the Solomon Islands and buys a plantation on Guadalcanal. So how can you really tell what the thing to do is?
Good point. Good point. Okay, next question is, Doug, can Comex go bankrupt?
Anything can go bankrupt. I mean, look, when was it MF Global, the largest clearing broker for commodities, went bankrupt? And not only that, but the guy that was running it, Corzine, who was the ex-governor of New Jersey and a big shot, he skated. So I guess anything can happen in today's world. This is why you really want to have some gold and silver coins in your own physical possession. I mean, look, my commodity account has been pretty good to me for some time, but the broker goes bankrupt. What am I going to do about it? What's anybody going to do about it? The answer is nothing.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Brazil? There's several different questions around it. So one is the economy now with Lula. Presumably, Lula is, I guess maybe we should start there. What are your thoughts on the election, the purported results to date? What do you think about it?
Well, the good news about Brazil is it's a big country. And, it's been through lots of ups and downs. I mean, 30 years ago it was run for a decade or so by the generals, and life is going to go on. Lula's a perfectly horrible people, and the people he's going to bring in with him are horrible people. Not that Bolsonaro's any prize, but still vastly better than Lula. So what's going to happen? Listen, what should happen to Brazil is that it should break up into several smaller countries. At least several smaller countries, because it's the northeast of Brazil has absolutely nothing in common with the rest of Brazil, except the Portuguese language, and the Amazon provinces have nothing in common. I mean, it's a domestic empire. At this point, it shouldn't be under one political rule.
Right. And that's really clarified in this case, assuming if you take all of the reported results as totally legitimate, it's like a 1% swing between the two candidates, but if you look at specific provinces, it's not like that. There's a majority, certainly clear majority in most of those provinces for their preference. And if they were allowed to, if it could break apart and they could choose on a smaller scale, everyone could be happy. But when you take this and it's basically evenly split. If you take the election results for what people say they are, it's evenly split, and it just sets the stage for half of the country to hate half the country and to fall into paralysis and maybe civil war. I mean, combining these groups into these under one umbrella is a big mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And things have been getting worse in Brazil for a long time. Like, one of the huge mistakes they made was setting up their artificial capital, Brasilia, in the middle of nowhere. It's always a bad sign when a country sets up a city where the government is centered around. That means all these people hang out with each other, and there's no commercial influences to moderate their stupidity. So Brasilia was a bad idea. Well, like all these Central Asian countries, like Kazakhstan has put I don't know how many Burma, it's another one. It seems like there's been a spate of third world countries building capital cities in the middle of nowhere. There's a number of them have done this recently. So it was a bad idea when Washington, D.C. Set the trend long ago at the start of the US. Anyway,
Okay. So what do you think about what impact do you think, assuming Lula is president and they get it, whatever the current situation is resolved, what effect do you think him being president would have on the economy, and in particular on Petrobras, which we've talked about here?
yeah, well, it can only be a bad effect. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, my understanding is that Bolsonaro's got a lot of supporters that basically are running the states in Brazil, and half of the country does support Bolsonaro. So I think Lula is going to have a hard time screwing things up as badly as would otherwise be the case. So it's like a giant tanker. It's going to take a while to turn Brazil around. And it's not like Venezuela. I mean, people say, well, what if it turns into Venezuela? Well, yeah, anything is possible. But here's the thing to remember, is that Venezuela was all about oil. So where all the government's revenues came from, it was all about oil. So you get control of the state and you nationalize the oil industry, you're in the catbird seat. But Brazil is an agricultural country.
Yep.
They're
They have
not going to
a
be,
good
yeah,
industrial base too.
exactly. So it's going to be much harder for him to screw it up, because the farmers are not going to want to have things stolen from them, and the manufacturers are going to feel the same way. So that and most of his support is regionalized in poor parts of the country. So yeah, I'm not too worried that there's going to be any radical changes in Brazil anytime soon. And incidentally, some years ago, it was about 10 years ago, I actually traced back the currencies of Argentina and Brazil back to the 20s, when they both used, when their currencies were gold, and Brazilian and Argentine gold coins circulated daily, and inflation wasn't a deal in either country. And since then, I think Argentina has pulled ahead in terms of how many currencies it's destroyed and the total, how many trillions of percent of inflation. But Brazil is pretty damn close. And in terms of regulation and bureaucracy, Brazil is actually worse than Argentina. It's like that wonderful movie, which I recommend to everybody, called Brazil, which really, I think, puts its finger on the place. Well, all that said, I like Brazil, especially the part of Brazil that's down Florianopolis and in south of Rio de Janeiro, even south of Sao Paulo. So it's it'll be okay.
Okay. Next question. Wells Fargo just reported mortgage activity down 90% year over year, and Zillow shows a drop off in a number of home transactions in the last few months. So what are the second order effects of housing sales and prices dropping off a cliff in America?
It's all about debt. You know, few people are aware that before World War II, or I should say before the New Deal, really, that if you wanted to buy a house, you had to save up and buy a house. And maybe, just maybe, you could get a bank to give you a 5-year mortgage. That was the most you could get, with 20% down minimum. But most of the time, when people bought houses back in those days, they paid cash and they saved up for a house. It's like you saved up for a car. That's what you did. You know, it's like if you wanted something, some consumer good, you saved up for it. And then you could buy it after you had the savings. So the whole thing is turned upside down. This idea of a 30-year fixed rate mortgage is actually insane and unsustainable. It really is.
Why
So,
why is it insane?
well, first of all, because a house is a consumer good. It's not a capital good, okay? And you shouldn't borrow for consumer goods because technically speaking, houses are depreciating assets. They're like a toothbrush. Well, that's a real depreciating asset. It's going to have to be replaced after a couple of months. Or you can move up to a car. A car has to be replaced after, well, depends on how you maintain it and so forth. But it's got to be replaced after 5 or 10 years or whatever. It's a depreciating asset. It falls apart over time. Well, it's the same with the house, which is just a very long-lived consumer good. It's got to be, it's got to be maintained. You know, the wood and everything falls apart on a house over time. So this idea of having a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and anyway, banks should not lend money unless they have deposits that are guaranteed for the same period of time. You lend money on a 3% mortgage, which they were doing up until last year. What that really means is you can't lend money for 30 years unless you're sure that you've got deposits for 30 years, but they don't. I mean, they borrow short and lend long. So yeah, I'd say most of the banks in the US are riding for a fall in bankruptcy, both as interest rates go a lot higher, because they've lent money for 30 years at 3%. Well, now it's 7%. But inflation is running 10 or 15%. So I think most of the banks in the US are going to go bankrupt if they have anything to do with the mortgage business, certainly.
So that's one second order effect. Is there any other second order effects that come to mind with regard to the housing problems?
Well, if we get the kind of unemployment that I expect we're going to get as the economy changes and companies go out of business, people lose their jobs. If they have mortgages, there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to make next month's mortgage payment. And then what happens? Well, you have your house put on the block, because at that point the bank wants its money back. So there's
Is there a provision in a lot of these mortgage agreements also where if the value of the home drops substantially, so it's now below, now you're in negative equity, the bank can demand more equity from you or can initiate a foreclosure at that point?
Is that true? I haven't
that was during
like that personally.
Yeah, I thought that's what happened during the housing bubble. That's why so many people were forced into foreclosure, because the prices dropped so much. It wasn't just the liar loans that were out there. It was that as the prices fell, that banks who became very if the bank's balance sheet came at risk because they had to write down the value of those assets, then they could call the loans on them.
Well, how about this? It's that there are a lot of floating rate mortgages in the US, and we've had very low interest rates for a very long time. And if you got a floating rate mortgage, you'd pay you'd pay less than a fixed rate mortgage. So there's lots of people that have taken out floating rate mortgages. And when they're readjusted to current levels, which is about 7% now, incidentally, and going higher, I think, they're not going to be able to crack their monthly payment. Then what happens?
Yeah, I'm just looking to see if I can find out what the current percentage of floating rate is. Can't see how much, just to see how much of that in the US there is.
Yeah, I mean, look, people are going to find out that their houses may turn out to be liabilities that are disguised as assets. And the real estate taxes that you have to pay for your house, they can be very substantial. I mean, a lot of people are paying 10, 15, 20,000, maybe much more sometimes in taxes on their house every year. Well, since the average, you know, and these local governments are prone to raise real estate taxes because it's only rich folks that own the and of course you've got utility bills too, that as energy prices go up, because of course production is going down and oil prices are going up a lot. I think there's a lot of homeowners that are going to get mightily squeezed here over this decade from
So
every point of view, every point of view, interest rate point of view, tax point of view, maintenance and energy point of view.
it's going to be a disaster. That's always things always worried to be about. I've always been on the other side of thinking that home ownership was the key to financial independence in America, and it seems like my parents' generation certainly benefited from that pretty substantially, where real estate prices went up a lot as part of the giant credit bubble in the United States. And so that, like, they still think, and a lot of personal finance people will tell you, you should own your own home because the mortgage interest is tax deductible, and it's going to only go up in value and all that. But it always seemed to me, if you look at the cost of owning a home, it's always very expensive, and I never, in any home I would want to live in myself, always seemed like a economic or it wasn't a good financial deal. And whereas I looked at other properties that I bought and I rented out, and I could make money on those. I could generate cash flow. The being able to depreciation would be really helpful to my taxes. All that was good, but not in any place. Those numbers never worked in any place that I would really want to live in.
Yeah, and if houses become hard to sell, which what you just pointed out, because if you cannot borrow money, you can't buy a house and you can't sell a house. So then it becomes an albatross around your neck where you're kind of stuck with that house. And people have gotten into the habit of thinking that housing prices, long-lived consumer good, is a one-way street. Well, maybe it's not a one-way street. I remember Dick Russell did an article, which I thought was a fantastic article, on where he researched the price of houses in San Diego during the last Depression. And there were plenty of houses in San Diego. Talk about a desirable place to be in a hot market. You could buy houses for back taxes. That's how cheap they got in San Diego.
Wow.
And he researched it, and there it was. It was in the papers. So
I found this article from CNBC. This article from CNBC from April of this year, and it's just saying that the adjustable rate mortgage share of applications during the prior week, and this was back in April, was 9% of the total by loan account was in the adjustable rates, and 17% based upon dollar volume was going for the adjustable rates, which would lead me to believe that there's a huge amount of adjustable rate mortgages, as you were suggesting, and those people are going to be hit by a freight train as interest rates go up.
Yeah, so while we have Jacobins in office in Washington, D.C. for at least another 2 years, they'll probably feel obligated to bail out people so that they don't lose their houses and wind up living under bridges or on the sidewalks of major cities. This is going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Next question here. Are there any safe places to store precious metals in Uruguay or neighboring countries?
Well, I wouldn't store them in Argentina because the current government there is crazy, and they feel like many governments do that, if they need to investigate what's in your safe deposit box, they'll do so. I don't know what the situation is like in Brazil. Not sure what the situation is like in Chile, but whatever it has been in Chile, it's getting worse because they elected a communist there, frankly. And they're still thinking, I don't think they've done it yet, but they're thinking of rewriting the Constitution and making it much more woke, which means with free stuff for people and less freedoms and that. So we basically, in South America, I think we're basically talking about Uruguay, which, there's at least one institution in Punta del Este. It's called Fort Box, which is a private safe deposit box depository. So that might be good. Seems to have very good security. But when it gets right down to it, it's better off to have a lot of these things in your own physical possession, maybe just buried in the backyard in a safe place.
The Midnight Garden.
The Midnight Garden, right. Exactly. It's too bad that things boil down to that sometimes. But this is, this is incidentally, I've collected, or used to collect, I should say more accurately, ancient Greek and Roman coins for years. And one of the reasons why ancient coins have never really caught fire is that as collector's items, even though they're artwork and they're beautiful, unlike current government coins, which are just slugs, quite frankly, and one looks the same as the other, except for, it's got a slightly different mint mark or something. I could never get the point of that. Whereas ancient coins are actually each is individual artwork. The point I'm trying to make, though, is this. It's that one of the reasons that they've never really caught fire as a collectible asset is that they're constantly, to this day, finding hordes of ancient coins that people buried. Because when the barbarians were riding over the hill, you better hide those coins someplace the barbarians are not going to see them, or the government, or the taxman, or God. So they're constantly finding hordes of ancient coins in all over Europe for just that reason. Well, I don't know. The person that buried it obviously wasn't in a position to take advantage of it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been buried for thousands of years later. It's kind of a testimony to the passing nature of things in this temporal world we are in. But
and also the idea of how do you preserve your capital is a problem that has been around as long as the idea of personal property's been around.
Yeah, exactly. You own real estate. Well, do you really own it? Because if you don't pay your taxes, you'll find out who really owns it after a short period of time. And the government changes. Maybe they'll decide to redistribute the land and take your title away from you. And the people that owned ground in, ancient Rome, well, when the government changed, when the barbarians came, well, they didn't really own it anymore, quite frankly. This is throughout history. This is a cosmic problem. You actually don't own anything. So it's kind of funny that the Schwabians are promoting this. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. And when you look at the average millennial or something, I think maybe they'd be perfectly happy if they could just have a place where they could order an avocado toast and a latte and have a table where they can look at their iPhone all day and they'd own nothing and be happy.
Exactly.
Hey, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, be happy is relative, though, because they also require apparently lots of psychoactive substances in their body constantly in order to reduce their anxiety, make them not feel depressed.
Yeah, that's right. And God forbid they say something and then, you know, they lose what little they have, or they get sued by, you know, some crazy trans person or whatnot. You know, this is, you know, sometimes, listen, being here on Earth can be nice and pleasant and fun and beautiful. And then other times, not so much.
And it seems like we're entering that that period now. I can't remember who said this yesterday. There was somebody. Oh, it was General Mattis was speaking in front of a bunch of people yesterday. You know, Mad Dog Mattis.
Yes.
And he said now the times we're living in right now are the least chaotic times in his mind we will experience for a long time into the future.
Yeah. That's the way I see it.
I agree. Yeah, it was just interesting to hear, you know, former Marine Corps general say the same thing. So things are going to get worse and more chaotic you got to plan for it as best you can.
Yeah. And a particularly quotable, bloodthirsty Marine Corps general, if I do say so myself.
He's got some killer quotes. He's got some killer quotes.
He really does.
I'm begging you with tears in my eyes, you know, like it's amazing. He was a bad chief of staff, though, for Trump. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Really dropped the ball there.
Well, it's Trump's fault. Trump exercised bad judgment in surrounding himself with people that, you know,
Had their own agenda.
didn't stand with him when time came to fix bayonets.
Yep, exactly. And you would like Mad Dog Mattis to be on your side, I think, when it came time to fix bayonets.
You would, but why did he desert? Why did he jump ship on Trump? And why did he join Trump and then desert in the face of the enemy later? That doesn't sound like the type of thing Mad Dog should do.
Certainly doesn't. And I'd like to, yeah, I would like to really, it'd be cool. It'd be interesting to see the inside story behind that. You know, was he always representing his primary interests, which maybe the legacy, you know, the deep state military, perhaps,
Maybe.
you know, or maybe he came in, you know, hopeful that Trump was something that he discovered he wasn't. You know, I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe both Trump and Mad Dog exercise bad judgment in choosing each other. I don't know.
Could be. And I'm sure we'll never know. These things will never come out, I'm sure. But
no, that's right. The winners will write the history, and it's uncertain who the winners are going to be at this point.
Well,
Even when it comes to the election next week.
I have no idea how that's going to turn out. I have no idea. I mean, I talked about my theory a few days ago, and I guess I'll explain it briefly if you want me to. It's that,
yeah, let's hear that.
It's like, it does seem to me that the zeitgeist has sort of shifted where people are a little more positive about stuff. And I believe, you know, again, I'm a conspiracy theorist. So I think that the powers that be like to, you know, they know they can move things in a certain direction with that, you know, energetically, you know, like people will tolerate so much, and then they've kind of got to ease off a little bit. So just like the euphoria that a lot of people had when Trump won, is just feeling a little bits of that now. I feel a little bits of that now, relating to, you know, that all the libs are being owned on Twitter, you know, that because of Elon taking it over, and people have a different view of that. And then also just as in the polls, it does seem like all the energy is on the Republican side. So my guess is that the Republicans will win, but it won't change anything fundamentally, because they, you know, controlling, you have Senate and Congress. Well, all that means is that they're going to spend all their time in hearings to try and get to the ground truth of what really the corruption that really happened, you know, during the last couple of years, but nothing will really get done. It'll keep Biden from maybe passing any more Inflation Reduction Act type things. But, you know, most of the bad stuff, the worst stuff that he can do, he doesn't need congressional approval to do. So I think it'll make people feel better, take the pressure off, but I don't think it'll resolve anything.
Well, that's a good point. And all those horrible people that live within the Washington Beltway, almost all of them are still going to be there in their various agencies. You know, they're all civil servants. You can't get rid of them almost. And they all have the wrong philosophies. They're all still going to be there. And a lot of even if the Republicans win, certain number of them are going to be so-called rhinos. And yeah, it's not going to. But anyway, I think there's a chance that, you know, since the Jacobins are in office, they're going to do anything that they possibly can to stay in office. So although I agree with what you say about the winds kind of changing back away from the wokists, still, if there's any way these people can cheat, they'll do it to stay in office and cement themselves further, if they can, to win in 2024, when I think we're going to be in the middle of a full-blown financial and economic, and God forbid, hopefully not a military crisis. So,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess I'm surprised though that there hasn't, knowing Jacobins wanting to maintain the reins of power, that nothing has been done. Nothing truly drastic has been done leading up to the election in order to try and cement that power. So I guess they could after the election. I mean, if you have military things escalating in Ukraine, you know, I can give the executive branch lots of powers that could, you know, that if we escalate into some serious war issue with Russia, then maybe they could hold on. But otherwise, it's hard to see. It's hard to imagine the process. You know, how they don't turn over the Congress.
I don't have a good grip on exactly how this works with early voting and mail-in voting and late voting and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure that the both sides are watching the other side to limit the other side's cheating.
Yep.
But I don't know. The Democrats have always been better at this than the Republicans, frankly.
I think so. I think that's that seems obvious, but I don't know. I mean, but more people are watching now than ever before. I think more people are expecting there to be problems, shenanigans than ever before. And so it almost seems like the opportunity for it will be lower than it has been recently because everyone's expecting it. But at the same time, it didn't change anything in Brazil where everyone was expecting shenanigans, and most people allege, at least the Bolsonaro supporters allege, that shenanigans did in fact happen. And now they're rioting about it or blocking streets. So
well, it ain't over till it's over. So I can't wait to see what happens. It's kind of like free entertainment, although it's not really free entertainment.
It's kind of expensive.
It's costly entertainment.
Yeah. So we were talking about chaos earlier. So someone asks why you think we haven't seen more political violence, you know, assassinations or assassination attempts on politicians worldwide or in the US. And then they ask if you foresee political violence in the USA on the horizon.
Oh, yes, I do. I foresee that we're going to have an explosion here in the US. It's just a question of what's the catalyst that's going to set it off. So, and I'm putting my money on financial or economic, et cetera, to, you know, the natives will get restless throughout the US, red people, blue people. Yeah, so I think that's a good way to, but listen, we gotta, you know, what do they always say? Let's hope for the best, but expect the worst. Yeah, that's pretty much the way I'm playing it.
Okay. Do you have a favorite offshore jurisdiction to incorporate a business or to bank?
Not sure it makes much difference anymore, quite frankly, with, you know, the way the SWIFT system works and the way that
The FATCA.
Yeah, FATCA and all the rest of it. Certainly, if you're an American, I don't think it makes all that much difference anymore, quite frankly. I mean, the good news on the horizon is that the Chinese and the Russians and maybe the Indians and God knows who else are doing something to
Counterbalance the hegemony.
exactly. Yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah, because
So,
that could open up more opportunities for that. If, because there's basically been zero opposition to, the worldwide regulatory framework, that the US has been forcing upon everybody, at least for Americans. There's been no
well, we
opposition.
have to look at the bright side of the US government being manifestly bankrupt. But, on the other hand, maybe there's no bright side because it's like a giant dinosaur in its death throes, and it's thrashing about instead of just placidly, stripping the plants of their leaves and all that type of thing. Now that it's in its death throes, it's thrashing around, destroying everything. So maybe it's not so good that the U.S. government's in its death throes, and they will try the central bank digital currency as a. I guess I think that is that the last arrow in their quiver to maintain the current corrupt system. God, I sure hope so.
I mean, I think it's the basis of the last one, that combined with social credit scores. I think that, that and automation, the technology to basically allow gating, so that you have to have permission to engage in activities, and through technology, it's automatically enforced. I think that's the ultimate way it gets, the last thing they could have. Yeah.
I guess all we can do is to try to avoid using their central bank digital currencies and your cell phone to transact things as much as possible. Try to do that, and don't cooperate with them to the degree you can.
Well, don't fall for the incentives that they'll use to try and draw you into it either. I think that's one of the big ways they get you.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, suppose they gave a war and nobody came. Well, suppose they, put up a digital currency and nobody used it and passed a whole bunch of laws and didn't obey them. And suppose they want you to cooperate in getting a high social credit score. My answer is basically screw you, and to tell friends and neighbors, not to be a whipped dog. That's really all we can do at this point.
Well, I was thinking about the social credit score thing, and one thing that would be good about it is that it would help me understand the people that I'm dealing with for the first time, because I could look at, if I could see their social credit score, if I could see it, then I would know whether or not it was a person who was who I should associate with or not. Of course, I would be using probably the exact opposite criteria that the state might be using, but it would be pretty informative. It almost reminded me of that, those books, Damon and Freedom, where basically everyone had a score, and you could kind of see, what people were ranked, because they were ranked by peer-to-peer interactions. And so you kind of knew the person, when you met somebody, you could kind of quickly assess whether or not they were a reliable character.
Yeah. We got to look at the bright side of almost everything.
If we're all going to have a score, we might as well use it for our benefit if we can. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's see, next question. Do you think that the credit has credit been maxed out for the average Joe? I mean, they've been tapping their credit for years and years. I mean, do you think we're reaching the end of that?
You'd think that would be the case, because we were talking earlier about once upon a time, if you wanted a house, you basically had to save up in order to get it. And then if you wanted a car, you had to save up in order to buy your car. And then they came up with 2-year financing, and then 3-year financing, then 5 years, 7-year, and then 7-year financing got to be too expensive. So you lease a car. Many people lease a car now, and instead of having a trivial asset in the form of a car that you actually own and you're paying off the mortgage on, if you lease it, you never own anything to start with. And when you trade it in on a new car, you're already several $1,000s behind the 8 ball because your lease is not amortized.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's kind of going on. I think this is part of the whole thing. The fact that the savings rate, is apparently at the lowest level since they've been keeping these records, like 3%. And why should people save? Because they realize the dollar is losing value much faster than any interest they're earning on it is. And meanwhile, a lot of people are speculating in the stock market. But here's a genuine fact. Small novice investors, quote unquote, or speculators, and they're not neither investors nor speculators, they're really gamblers, but they don't know that. They almost all lose money. They almost always wipe themselves out. So none of this augurs very well, quite frankly, for the average guy building assets and slowly becoming well-to-do.
And that, so the becoming well-to-do is unlikely. The question is, I think, as things, credit's maxed out, costs are going up, real incomes going down, economy on the verge of, difficulty, which would cause unemployment to go up. At what point do people go out into the streets? At what point do they, start doing something in the physical world to, protest their bad situation?
Yeah, what form will that take, actually? What form will it take? Unwashed masses piling into the streets and with placards and signs and yelling for somebody to kiss their situation and make it better? I don't know.
What about the continuation of these flash mobs where they go into a store? And now you see it in a lot of, you see it in like people going into 7-Elevens, usually a lot of kids going into a 7-Eleven at one time, and they empty the shelves and they come out, and the shopkeeper can do nothing to stop them. But maybe that trend spreads, and it's in grocery stores, and it's, not necessarily the kids doing it. It's, just normal people who need to feed their families. Maybe it's that kind of thing.
I think that's a good bet, actually. I mean, they're using technology to its best advantage.
Show up at the same time, and they can't stop you, and
No,
a lot
they
of them
can't.
don't even
Well, entirely apart from the fact that in a number of cities in the country, if you steal less than $1,000, even if they catch you, which they won't, that you can't be prosecuted as more than is it a misdemeanor, or perhaps prosecuted as at all? I don't know.
Just a citation, like a parking ticket, I think.
Yeah.
So flash mobs, that's a prediction, I think. Flash mobs among, not among the, lower middle class. I think that you could start seeing that much sooner.
Or maybe it'll spread into the middle class for that matter, because the middle class is being ground between the millstone, like as Lenin said, of taxation and inflation. So they'll drop into the lower classes.
Right.
Unless they become a politician or a big shot corporate executive, in which case they elevate themselves way above the hoi polloi.
Not going to happen for many of them, though. There are only so many spots at the top.
Yes, that's right. That's right. These horrible people are all fighting for it, greasing the rungs on the ladder below them and stabbing each other in the back. And yeah.
Good people. Good.
All
right, just 2 more questions, Doug. What would you recommend? This is a 25 to 30-year-old guy, I guess. He says he'd like to invest $200 to $300 every month. Just the way that you're told to invest is that you every month, you just continually put some capital away. In what form would somebody who's, in the 25 to 30 years old, what form would you recommend they do that at this time?
It'd be great to, just buy a no load mutual fund, well managed, and it would grow every month. But wait a minute, we've had a 40-year bull market in stocks in general, and bonds for that matter. So how are you going to pick the right fund that you can put your money away with? There was a woman that stopped by here earlier today, and she was telling me that she had increased her savings from her job to putting aside like 25%. But she says, I've got less money now than I did last year, even though I've saved 25% of my income. Well, that doesn't feel good at all, you know? So can I recommend anybody buy a mutual fund and prudently save your money and see it compound with dividends and growth and all that? God, I don't have confidence in that for the next decade, more or less. I really don't. Entirely apart from the fact that your mutual fund manager might be a moron.
Good chance.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance of that being the case. So what should you do? Listen, I'm forced to go back to at least for the next few years, saving gold and silver coins, getting a hoard of them together. And, you know, at that point, maybe you'll have enough capital that the right speculation will show up, the right investment will show up, and you can pounce. But how do you accumulate capital in the meantime? I don't know how you do it except for with those kind of numbers, except save gold and silver coins on a monthly basis.
I think you could take a percentage of that and buy some crypto. I wouldn't do it with all of it. I wouldn't do it with even most of it. But I think is like if you think of it as a barbell strategy, you know, where the physical gold and silver is much more conservative, although silver has a lot of upside, I think, but gold is more preserving your wealth, which is really important. I mean, if you're saving the money, the thing is you want it saved, and gold, the idea of gold is that it provides that. But if you take maybe if it's 10% of what you're buying or 20% and just put a little bit of that in crypto.
I think that makes sense, because the good thing about crypto is it's a reasonably private asset, and it will allow you to cross a border more easily than with any other type of asset. That's a good thing. And it's not like you're buying, it's not like you're buying Bitcoin, you know, $2 anymore. It's 20,000. So, you know, how much higher can it go? I don't know. Somewhat higher, I guess. But
I think it can go a lot higher personally, but I also think it can go a lot lower. I think the price could go down by half before it goes up more. But the way I've always saw the Bitcoin when I was investing in it, especially early on, it was just that I thought of it as a speculation. And so I put some in it. I wanted to own some. And just as they continue to appreciate, you know, it goes through these big cycles, and it goes through these big appreciation cycles. If those continue and you can, you know, accumulate as that cycle is kind of starting to reform, then they can end up being a huge positive speculation. And the downside, I think, is fairly limited from here. You know, I really do, compared to the stock market or bond market.
have you checked the price of Bitcoin today?
I haven't checked today. It would be interesting to see how it's moved with all the commodities. Actually, it's a good question. I'll check. It's up 3.5% today. So it's 21,000.
That's pretty good. 3.5%. Yeah,
It's nice to see it moving with the commodities.
Yes, that's a good move, actually. All right, good. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. Last question here. It says, with everything appearing to spiral out of control exponentially, what time frame are you guessing on for a total collapse type scenario to take place? We should define, are you actually planning for a total collapse type scenario to take place? Does he mean like a Mad Max scenario? It's hard to I think people's vision of a total collapse, I think, might be very different. So we should clarify that first before you address
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. Look, I think we're on the edge of the precipice, and the next few years are going to be really ugly. And how ugly are they going to get? A lot of it depends on what the government, on what the state does. And all I can do is repeat, the state is not your friend. The state is your enemy. They're predators and you're the prey. So, and they're in control. So, yeah, I think we're starting the big one. Famous last words. Hope I'm wrong, because I like good times more than bad times, even if they're artificial good times. I far prefer artificial good times to real bad times. But the artificial good times are over and the real bad times are here. And so now, the answer is now. And how long is it going to go on?
I think, but you say now, the thing I think people have a hard time with is that, you know, because we've from an individual's perspective, it's like the boiling frog type thing, where things are substantially worse than they were 3 years ago or 20 years ago and all of that. They're substantially worse. And yet there isn't like some triggering event where now, you know, we're living in Mad Max. Like, and so we're in this crisis. It's a era of crisis, right? It's a crisis era, and it could go on for a long time and might not. And unless you're, in my mind, unless you're aware of that, it's a slow moving train wreck or something, you know, that things get worse and worse by the day. Unless you're aware that that's happening, you might not notice it, because you might just feel, yeah, I'm a little, you know, we don't notice these gradual changes. Or do you see something that's really acute, and then all of a sudden everyone wakes up and knows, okay, we're really in collapse?
Yeah, that could very easily happen. So what should you do? Since we don't know exactly what's going to happen, we don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't say. All my advice would be this. It's that cut your standard of living down now while you're still in control. So reduce your expenditures and your consumption, and if you can, increase your income and production. Take a second job or something like that, or whatever. So you do those two things now while you're still in control. That's all you can do, I think. I mean, from a practical day-to-day viewpoint.
Yeah, makes sense. And I guess the other thing is, if you take Mattis's advice that, you know, or at least his perspective, that this is the least chaotic, today is the least chaotic day probably that you're going to experience, and try and use that day to your advantage, whether it just be appreciating the fact that the world is still functioning pretty normally, you know, and do things that you can do now that you won't be able to do later.
And look at the bright side. You're going to have some really exciting stories to tell your children and grandchildren in the future.
And you always tell me that you wish that you would have been a better journal keeper over the years. I mean, this is an interesting time to keep a journal, I think.
Yeah, I think it is a good time to keep a journal. It'll help you to keep things in proportion. Yeah, I agree.
Be able to remember the names and dates later, right? So, okay, well, good. I think that's it for this week, Doug. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as a concluding comment, this I doubt it's going to get as bad as Berlin in 1945. So once again, look at the bright side.
Do a little reading. Do a little reading in 1945. Let's hope it doesn't get that bad. Good. Okay. Unless you're actually still living in Berlin for some reason, in which case you might want to get out, because anything can happen there.
Yes, that's absolutely right. It could get as bad as Berlin in 2025. And gee, I remember what it was like. And you know, there might be some old timers say, yeah, I remember what it was like in 1945. And that was no fun either. So.
All right, good. Thank you, Doug. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, Matt, thanks.